Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to today's morning blast with myself and Mr. Michael Brown. It is April the 16th. It is Wednesday all day. As usual, myself and Michael will be jumpstarting your trading day with an explosive daily market preview, where Michael will be giving some insights. I'll be throwing out some news. But before we do, let's get the legals out the way. So, as usual, nothing discussed in this space is session constitute trading or investment advice when first any kind of endorsement by PIQ or indeed the hosts, which, as you know by now, is myself, Mr. Ryan Paisley, and of course, Mr. Michael Brown. Good morning, my dear friend. If he joins, there he is.
Very good morning, Ryan. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. How are you, my old bean? You good?
I am all right, actually. Yeah, the sun is shining. Let me just make my way into a little telephone booth, even if I am the only man in the office at 8:30 on a Wednesday morning,
Are you
which is
really the only man in the office?
I am indeed, yes, and that's
Oh,
quite frankly laughable.
yeah. Disgusting, really.
It really is. You know, the youth of today, they just cannot hack it, can they?
Says the 27-year-old.
Yeah, it
What's been
feels
occurring,
like an
my good friend?
87-year-old at this
Yeah,
point.
well, yeah. And I can vouch that you do sometimes act like one.
Well, certainly got hair like one, that's for sure.
I
Before
wasn't going
anyone
to
else
comment.
goes there.
I wasn't going to comment. But enough about us. What's been occurring?
Indeed, yes. Let's crack on. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. 2 days to go in the week, of course, with it being Easter this weekend.
Of
It
course, yeah.
was, I guess, a kind of sort of weirdly calm day yesterday.
Yeah.
And also, you could kind of say that for trade that we saw on Monday as well, because, of course, we didn't speak yesterday. But suffice to say that that calm has really been shattered overnight after a few developments out of the United States. A market striking a decidedly risk-averse tone this morning, with the S&P future trading lower by around about 1.5%, the Nasdaq future trading lower by about 2%, Treasuries rallying across the curve, with the 10-year yield down by about 4 basis points this morning at 4.3%. And we also see continued selling pressure in the dollar, with the greenback actually just trading to session lows around 99.40 as I left the desk a moment ago. Kind of a confluence of factors behind this, really, in terms of developments that we had overnight. Firstly, we had news out of the United States that they have launched a probe into critical minerals, all of these rare earth minerals that President Trump keeps talking about. I think we should all know the drill by now, that when the US launches a probe into something, the conclusion of that probe is tariffs or restrictions of some kind being imposed on whatever it is they
Yeah.
have started to investigate. We saw that with automobiles. We saw that with the quote unquote reciprocal tariffs. They're also probing, of course, pharmaceuticals and semiconductors and computer chips. Rare earths are just the latest one to add to that list. Other bits and bobs that we had out overnight: the Wall Street Journal, they have reported that the US is apparently pressuring other countries around the world to limit their dealings with China. This basically feeds into what I think it was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was saying relatively recently, along the lines of we're kind of trying to unite everyone against China, and then we all go to China together to try and strike a trade deal with them. That seems to be what the US are trying to do, sort of build a coalition of countries that they are allied with, and then they all go to China with and sort of air their grievances as one, rather than the US going alone. But it does appear, I don't want to get all sort of big picture 4D chess on everyone here, but it does appear that you're
Snakes
kind
and
of going to
ladders,
end up.
please. Snakes and ladders.
Yeah, even that's a bit of a stretch. It does appear that you're going to end up with this kind of split world where it's either you're an ally of the US or you're an ally of China, and countries and trading blocs effectively just need to pick which side of that divide they want
It's
to come
I
down on.
I believe this is what the geopole nerds call multipolar.
Oh,
But I
fuck
might
knows,
be
to be honest.
because I keep seeing it banded around, and I'm connecting dots. I might be well off. I know I've got bipolar, if that helps, but yeah, which will be a
Moving
shock
on.
to no one.
Moving on from that, we also had news out from Nvidia overnight. They have said that, and of course, this is my specialist subject, so I'm well on
Oh
top of
yeah.
everything that's going on here. They have said that the US now requires a license for Nvidia to export H20 products to China. I understand that H20 is one of their sort of top of the line computer chips at the moment. Specifically to Nvidia, they are now factoring in charges of $5.5 billion in the first quarter as a result of, well, effectively this trade embargo that has been put in place. Again, it just shows how all trade between the United States and China on both sides is just kind of fizzling out to zero at
Just
this moment in time. Sorry, just one last thing on
yeah, go on.
this, because we had the US obviously going, we don't want our chips going to China. Well, China turned around yesterday. This was sort of early doors yesterday, and said, well, actually, we're going to halt all imports of Boeing aeroplanes and Boeing parts. So it's all getting very sort of tit for tat at this point.
So just on this, because it was a Reuters exclusive just before we started the show, it's been announced. I've just posted it. Well, I say the PIQ elves posted on our Twitter
Someone.
feed. Yeah, someone. Reuters exclusive that Nvidia actually kept some China customers in the dark about how the new US chip clampdown was working. Basically trying to get as many chips over there as possible without actually letting China know that they've just been told by the US government that they can't sell them. So definitely an article to read up. Hang on, I'll stick up in the jumbotron or whatever it is. So definitely one to keep an eye on if you're interested in that in Nvidia names.
Yeah, a little bit sneaky on their part.
I would say so.
That article also noted that apparently Nvidia have let me start that again. Nvidia year to date have received around $18 billion worth of orders for these H20 chips. So, yeah, clearly quite a significant hit to their business coming from that one. Last thing just to mention on trade is that we had some reports from Bloomberg sources citing EU officials yesterday, noting that effectively talks between the EU and the US have really not made any progress whatsoever, and that the EU expects these 20% reciprocal tariffs not to be removed entirely at the conclusion of these talks, no matter whether a deal is made or not. Again, this is in fitting with what we heard from Kevin Hassett, one of Trump's top economic advisors. He said, well, probably about a week or so ago now, just after Trump's pivot, that effectively this 10% tariff that's in place for the next 90 days, that is kind of the baseline floor, and it would take an extraordinary deal for tariffs to go below that level. So certainly something to bear in mind. Even if trade deals are struck, it looks like that 10% is here to
Well,
stay potentially.
So just on this, and again, this is something that it's been very well telegraphed by Trump, saying, look, it's not just about tariffs. We must shrink deficits. And on that, as me and you have mentioned multiple times, and it's good that Alpha Picks are listening in, because I'm going to shamelessly plug the article from them that's coming out later today. As we know that LNG and energy and also agricultural products are the low hanging fruit to shrink these
Mm.
deficits. So when they say, we expect an extraordinary deal and stuff like that, as we know, then the Trump administration aren't just looking at tariffs. They also want to see other purchases added onto that. And I have also helped write, I've actually got out my crayons and helped put a bit of insight into the Alpha Pix's piece that's coming out later today, where
Oh
I kind
my
of
god, they must be
tout the fact
desperate.
that, well, they are very
Was I
obviously.
busy that day or something?
Oh wow, wow! I think you were. I think that might explain it. But I tout that LNG could be something, not even just the short term, but the longer term could be very beneficial. Or everything that's going on could be very beneficial to both upstream, midstream, and downstream LNG plays. But there, anyway, enough shameless plugging. Everyone loves a good plug. See you later. Carry
Do you
on.
want to mention that you used to trade gas back in the day as well, or are we?
It's in the article.
Oh, of course it is. Yeah. Uncle Albert over there down on the south coast.
Through the floor.
Anyway, moving on from that, a few other bits and bobs going on yesterday away from trade, because mercifully there are other things to bear in
Thank
mind.
God.
We did have earnings from both Bank of America and Citi. They beat on top and bottom lines respectively. Both rallied about 1% or so pre-market, but clearly they're not going to be higher in the pre-market this morning, given the state of the broader market. Sticking with
Clearly.
equities, one for Christine Lagarde, Hermes. They have surpassed LVMH as the world's most valuable luxury company, and I'm sure she's going to be demonstrating some of their new lines at the ECB press conference tomorrow. For the fixed income watchers, just worth bearing in mind that Germany sold 5-year bonds yesterday. That auction was oversubscribed by 1.4 times. The reason I'm flagging this is because it was the least since 2023. And just given how sort of jittery fixed income participants have been of late, perhaps something to keep on the radar.
Just
Certainly with, well, one sec, certainly
yeah,
with
go on.
Germany doing 500 billion euros of fiscal stimulus, they're going to need to flog all the bonds that they can.
So on this, and again, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's very pertinent. We saw, I believe, late last week, it was the uh, DMO. I think it was the DMO in the UK said they were going to delay the gilt auctions, right? Some longer term gilt
No, that was
auctions.
the BOE.
Oh,
So
sorry,
this was
BOE.
part of the bank's quantitative tightening. They were
Right.
meant to be selling 30-year plus bonds, but they ended up selling at the front end instead because of
Got
the prevailing market conditions.
got you. So yeah, we love to shit on central banks when we can, but that does look like a very quite a shrewd move that they're saying, look,
Mm.
let's just hold on for a second and work out what's going on. Yeah, which we got to give them credit when it's due.
Yes, no, absolutely. And there is a good piece written by Marcus Ashworth on Bloomberg.
Okay.
Might be on the terminal only, but he wrote yesterday about that sale and also arguing that the BOE should probably just stop selling bonds outright. So worth a read if anyone
Ah,
gets
good.
5 minutes. Other than that, a few bits and bobs of data just to run through very quickly. Firstly, yesterday we had the speaking of Germany, the latest ZEW sentiment survey out of Germany. The expectations index that fell to -14 in April
Oof.
from the 51 positive 51.6
Oof.
that we saw in March. That fall is the second biggest month on month drop in the history of the series, trumped only by the fall that we saw at the start of the Ukraine war. This survey period covered just after Trump's U turn on tariffs. And clearly, what we saw in the March figures was a big boost on the fiscal stimulus that I just mentioned. And then what we saw in the April figures was a big slap lower as a result of the tariffs and the uncertainty that all of that has brought. We've also had the latest inflation figures out of Canada. CPI in Canada rising by 2.3% on an annual basis in March, much cooler than expected and below the prior 2.6. Of course, the latest Bank of Canada decision is due this afternoon, which we'll talk about in a few minutes' time. And then overnight, we had a bit of a data deluge out of China, so do take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. GDP in China growing by 5.4% on an annual basis in the first quarter, unchanged from the pace that we saw in Q4. If you believe the data, which I'll leave that up to you, then the beat in GDP that was driven primarily by a surge in exports, and this
Yeah.
is basically the opposite of what we're going to see with the US data, where people are front running the tariffs, so it
Yeah.
boosts your export numbers, which boosts GDP.
So
On the flip side of that, sorry, just one sec.
yeah, go
In
on.
the US, because imports are going to surge, it's going to act as a drag on your GDP
Yeah.
growth.
And that's exactly why we've seen the Atlanta Fed like missing below in like the real like the Fed now data,
Mm.
which is obviously very like more higher frequency. And the reason why we've seen those wobbly numbers is because of exactly that, exactly what Michael said. As usual, like as me and Michael always give a caveat, a huge caveat on Chinese data. However, the uptick, regardless of where it should be, I think the uptick is absolutely what we would expect. So yes, the overriding number is probably manipulated slightly, but I think the boost is probably
Slightly.
there and legit. Yeah,
Yes, no, I agree. The other thing just to bear in mind
I
is
love it when you
we
say
have
that.
had um, a load of sell side institutions revising down their GDP forecasts out of China this morning. To be completely honest, I don't know why they bother forecasting the data when it's made up, but nonetheless, that is what they're doing. The last thing I wanted to mention this morning is we have had the latest inflation figures out of the United Kingdom. Speaking of dodgy
Woohoo!
statistics, of course, the ONS unable to produce PPI data this time because they're just a shit
Why
show.
not?
Nevertheless, we did have headline CPI coming at 2.6% on an annual basis in March, below both market expectations and the BOE's forecast of 2.7%. Core CPI that fell to 3.4 from a prior 3.5%, and services CPI that came in at 4.7%, down from the prior 5%, and also below the BOE's 4.9% forecast. We have seen markets reprice in a dovish direction after that data, with a 25 basis point cut in May now fully priced, and around 85 basis points of easing in the curve by year end, which is up about 10 basis points from where we were this time yesterday. Before anyone gets too excited, though, about the UK inflation figures, bear in mind that this is kind of the calm before the storm. The April data is going to be pretty grim, as anyone who is in the UK will know. We had a whole host of price rises at the start of April in terms of builds and all the rest of it. And of course, as we move through Q2 and Q3, businesses are likely to end up raising their prices quite considerably in order to
Yeah.
pay for the additional national insurance contributions that they now have to make as well. So certainly not out of the woods when it comes to price pressures here in the UK. And for the moment, that is all from me.
Wonderful. Just finally on what you just mentioned then, I did see Rachel Reeves was very quick to jump on the onto social media to claim a win because that there's no inflation or whatever. And I was sitting there thinking, you wait until next week or sorry, next month.
Oh,
We'll,
yeah.
we'll see if it's like there's nothing like jumping on old data to try and prove how good you are.
No, but that
But
would
yeah.
next. It won't be her fault when it goes up.
Oh no, it's Trump next month. Yeah, sorry, I completely forgot. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Ridiculous. Well, Michael, thank you for that. Before we go back to you, let's read out some overnight news headlines via our overnight news roundup, which is compiled by the awesome Zachary, still on the slopes. So he's putting in a shift whilst après skiing. So, firstly, in the trade policy news, the Trump administration is leveraging tariff negotiations to pressure allies into restricting Chinese trade routes and business presence within their borders. That's per the Wall Street Journal. The US Commerce Department has added new export restrictions on Nvidia and AMD's AI chips headed to China. As we said just now, there was a story that broke just before we came on air saying that Nvidia failed to tell Chinese consumers or customers that this was happening. So naughty boys and girls. Trump has ordered a probe into tariffs on US critical mineral imports, targeting Chinese dominance in the sector. We also heard, I believe on Friday it was, that China, or maybe the weekend, that China has stopped or limiting severely the export of critical minerals and rare earth minerals. So one to keep an eye on. China appointed veteran WTO negotiator to replace the vice commerce minister, sorry, signaling a tougher posture. Japan
Where?
enters trade. Japan, Japan. I
You
don't know
sounded
the
almost
answer.
shocked. But
Yeah, I know. I was like, what? Japan enters trade talks with many cards to play, while UK says a deal is possible but distant. In terms of macro moves, Treasury Secretary Besant dismissed fears of China weaponizing its US debt holdings and hinted at intervention if yields spike. Trump signed an
actually,
executive
I
order.
wanted to.
Yeah, go on.
Well,
Go for it, mate.
obviously, Besant is not going to turn around and go, oh, everyone's dumping our debt en masse. And frankly,
No.
I don't think China are, because they'd just be shooting themselves in the foot because the
Yeah.
CMY would head through the roof. But it's kind of a tough one when you look at the way markets moved last week. It's kind of tough to conclude anything other than people are trying to reduce their exposure
Yeah.
to the
No,
US. Um,
exactly that.
it's just the fact that he can't say that out loud.
No, exactly that. And I think you're right. It's not like I think we did mention this at one point last week. It was like, when we did see that selling in treasuries, it did, and it was in the APAC session as well. We call it the volumes going through on the cash side on that was quite significant.
Mm,
It did smell a bit whiffy of central bank selling or countries selling. But
yeah.
that's not okay. That's we're not saying that they're doing that to dump their entire treasury holdings. We're just talking about taking some off the books and taking some profit or
Mm.
whatever. You can
Actually,
sell a
on
little without selling a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, on that, and annoyingly, the spreadsheet's at my desk, so I'll have to dig that out in a second. But I was running the numbers yesterday because I'm sad and got no life on how the dollar index had been performing in each of the sessions, so Tokyo, London, New York.
Yeah.
And since Liberation Day, which was the 2nd of April, the average performance, the dollar index to the downside, the magnitude of the move lower is about 3 times as big during Tokyo as it is
Oh,
during
there you
New
go.
York. Now, there's obviously other factors at play. If you get a headline that breaks, during New York, it's going to skew the data. But just as a
Yeah.
kind of again, sort of back of the envelope proxy, it sort of points to that reduction in exposure as well.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about probably mere percentage points, if that, on their total holdings. We're not saying they've just they're shipping them out as on the offer and staying on the offer. But
No,
anyway, Trump has signed an executive order to cut prescription drug costs and claimed on Truth Social that inflation and prices are falling. China's Q1 GDP beat by 5.4% year on year, as Michael said just now. Bank of Japan Governor Ueda warned that US tariffs could derail Japan's recovery and signaled potential policy adjustments. UK inflation, as Michael said just now, slowed for a second month, giving households a brief release ahead of rising energy bills. And also, as Michael said, there's a lot coming this way into the inflation data, which possibly, well, potentially, likely going to put an uptick into that. Gold hit record highs as haven demand grows amid tariff war fears, while Chinese stocks retreated after a 6-day rally. In geopolitics, Secretary of State Rubio and envoy Steve Witkoff will visit Paris this week to discuss Ukraine, Iran, and trade cooperation amid tariff uncertainty. The US is softening demand for aid repayment from Ukraine as both sides explore deeper economic ties. On the equities and corporate moves now, just a few headlines from here. Nvidia shares dropped over 6% after saying it would take a 5.5 billion with a B charge from US export controls on its AI chips to China. ASML missed Q1 order expectations and warned that Trump's tariffs unpredictability is delaying chip sector decisions. I think a lot of people are suggesting this. It's not so much the tariff. Well, obviously the tariffs hurt, but it's the uncertainty surrounding this, which is making any capex or any kind of decisions very, very difficult.
yeah, no, you're right
Meta.
on that one. I
You're,
think this.
oh, stop it.
Well, no,
Oh
this
God.
goes back to the
Oh,
point that we were making. Last Thursday, I think it was, after this U-turn, where
yeah,
you've now got 90 days of uncertainty. How can anyone really do anything in that period
yeah.
with any degree of conviction, whether you're
Well,
a business or a consumer or whatever?
well, this is it, and especially those people that are looking to make write these big, big checks for maybe new manufacturing facilities or whatever. You put all this effort into choosing the country, the site, and all that, and you're like, well, hang on, what? We don't know what Trump's going to do with that country in 2 days' time. We need to kind
Two
of
hours.
take a breath and go, well, this is it, and it will all change tomorrow anyway.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
Meta offered $450 million dollars to settle its FTC antitrust case, far below the 30 billion previously floated. That is a massive
that's not a
shift.
rounding error, is it? Jesus.
No, definitely not.
I,
Fucking hell.
I, I was expecting a difference, but not 30 billion.
Right? Um, Tesla suspended shipments of parts from China for the Cybercab and Semi due to rising tariffs. United Airlines returned to profit in Q1 despite a
They've
challenging
taken off.
economic backdrop. Oh, behave. So the embargo's been lifted then. JB, I should add that's an embargo on Michael's puns, nothing to do with
Yeah,
with
nothing to do with
United
the
Airlines.
earnings. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, not at all. JB Hunt reported, I said Hunt, reported lower profit and revenue amid freight sector overcapacity and weak demand. Oh God, where am I? Omicron cut its growth outlook, citing tariff-related spending uncertainties among advertisers. TSMC raised US 4 nanometer fab prices by 30% amid strong demand and tariff-driven supply chain shifts. Obviously, more people looking to buy.
They report
Gone.
earnings tomorrow, by the way.
Ah, good one. Knowledge. Xpeng, the Chinese EV maker, said it has restructured its supply chain to avoid US China tensions fallout. Honda is relocating US production of the Civic hybrid from Japan to Indiana. Nice win for a US trade there. Vale's iron ore output fell short of estimates due to weather and licensing issues. Rio Tinto's iron ore shipments are trending towards the lower end of guidance after cyclone disruptions in Australia. And finally, from me, get the beers in. Heineken beat quarterly estimates but warned of continued geopolitical and consumer volatility. So basically, do your part, go out and buy some beer. And that's it from me. Back to you in the studio.
Good stuff. Thank you, Ryan. I did say the other day that the best hedge for equity downside is another pint, and I stand
Oh,
by
I
that
like
view.
that. Yeah,
Anyway, in
all
terms
for it.
of in terms of today, then on the data front, it is a relatively subdued European morning with just the latest inflation data out of the eurozone due at 10 o'clock this morning. This is the final data for March, where the headline CPI print is expected to be unrevised at 2.2% on a year-on-year basis. The US session is considerably busier as we move through the remainder of the day. At 1:30, the most notable release of the day and also of the week stands as the March US retail sales report. Sales expected to have risen by 1.3% on a month-on-month basis last month, up from a disappointing 0.2% rise that we saw in February. And of course, we had a very disappointing January print as well. The data will be very, very closely watched given ongoing risks and concerns about a slowdown or even a recession in the United States economy. And particular focus will fall on whether this plunge that we've seen in consumer confidence and consumer sentiment gauges has actually translated into those consumers tightening their belts and beginning to spend less. Of course, we all know that consumer spending really does underpin and is the engine of economic growth in the United States. And if we start to see the pace of spending
Well,
slow,
everywhere.
then, well, apart from China, maybe. But you're
Say
absolutely
that.
right. Well, yeah, quite. So if we do see consumers beginning to pull back on spending a little bit, then that raises downside risks for the US economy at large. In terms of other bits and bobs this afternoon, at 2:15 London time, we have the latest industrial production data from the States. Production seen falling by 0.2% on the month in March compared to the 0.7% increase that we saw in February. And then at 2:45, we have a policy decision due from the Bank of Canada. Expectations are that they keep rates unchanged at 2.75%, despite that cooler than expected CPI data yesterday. Of course, the BOC making this policy decision with what, 2 and a bit weeks left to run in the election campaign in Canada. So I think they're going to try and stay as closely to their script as they possibly can, and certainly will not want to be seen to be swayed by any sort of political influence. Other bits and bobs to keep an eye on, we do have some speeches due today. The Fed's Hamac is due to speak at some point this afternoon, 5 o'clock London time, and then at 6:30 London time, we're due to hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell. This will, of course, be the first time we've heard from Powell since the 4th of April, I believe it was. He spoke on Payrolls Friday, so we haven't had any comments from the chair since Trump did this U-turn on tariffs. So it'll be particularly interesting to see how his economic outlook has evolved, if indeed it has, and particularly interesting as well to see whether he subscribes to the view of Christopher Waller, who spoke earlier in the week, saying in the event of large tariffs, that would necessitate large rate cuts due to the downside growth risks it presents. To me, that felt like Chris Waller auditioning for the Fed chair job next year and just trying to get on Trump's good side. But we'll
Yeah.
nonetheless see what Powell has to say later. And last but by no means least, we do have some supply due from the United States, a 20-year bond sale at 6 o'clock London time this evening. And that is your lot from me for now.
Amazing. I just wanted to give a special shout out to our American friends Tracy and Nick. It must be
I was just
bloody
said
early
very
over there.
early, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's dedication for you. We want more. We like these people. These are good people. But Michael, thank you very much. Obviously,
Either they're up very early or they haven't gone to bed.
well, I know them both. They're up early. They're dedicated to the European Open. Market professionals, one and all. Michael, thank you so much.
Unlike us.
Yeah, unlike us. Shout out to obviously Alpha Pix, whose note is coming out a bit later. Cam, who's going to be doing the crypto blast with me at 1 o'clock UK time, and of course Zachary for doing the overnight news roundup. All of them are stars. But Michael, you're the biggest star for now.
Ah,
But yeah, listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. We really do appreciate you. If you are trading today, keep it tight. Remember to factor in the fuckery, and we'll see you in tomorrow.
indeed. Bye for now.